There's a version of you that sabotages every good thing you build. It shows up when you're about to win, right before the promotion, the relationship, the breakthrough, and it pulls the pin. Not your enemy, not bad luck. You, the hidden part of you, the one you've been pretending doesn't exist since roughly the 3rd grade. Carl Jung called it the shadow. The Stoics didn't have a cute name for it. They just called it what it was, the unexamined life. And Socrates, who predated both of them, said living that way wasn't really living at all. But here's the part nobody tells you in the self-help section of Barnes & Noble. You don't defeat your shadow by fighting it. You don't outrun it with a morning routine. You don't drown it in dopamine or discipline. You integrate it. You turn the darkest parts of yourself into fuel. And once you do, the self-mastery you've been chasing your whole life stops being a destination. It becomes your default state. Today we're going 10 levels deep. 10 truths about your shadow. What it is, where it hides, why it runs half your decisions, and how to drag it into the light. By the end, you will understand yourself in a way most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Stay with me. 1. The shadow is not your enemy. It's your evicted tenant. Here's the most misunderstood thing about the shadow self. It didn't form because you're broken. It formed because you were smart. As a kid, you learned fast which parts of you got applause and which parts got silence, disappointment or punishment. So you did what any rational creature does. You locked the rejected parts in the basement and built your personality on top of the lock. Psychologists call this repression. Stoics would say you outsourced your judgment to other people's opinions and then forgot you did it. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that a man who doesn't know what's inside him is like a soldier who doesn't know the terrain of his own battlefield. He will lose not because his enemy is stronger, but because he keeps stepping into the same ambush. Your evicted tenant isn't gone. It's just banging on pipes at 3 a.m. The anxiety, the rage that seems disproportionate, the craving that makes no logical sense. You don't evict the shadow. You invite it back in. Give it a seat at the table and find out what it actually wants. Because here's the thing that anger you've been suppressing. It might be the only part of you that knows where your real boundaries are. 2. You can't outperform a wound you haven't looked at. Let's talk about the highest achieving, most self-destructive people on the planet. Not because it's entertaining, though it is, but because they prove a brutal point. The person who builds a $50 million company and loses it in a cocaine spiral. The athlete who dominates their sport and wrecks every intimate relationship they've ever had. The person who reads every book on emotional intelligence and still screams at people in traffic. Performance without self-knowledge is a skyscraper on sand. It looks impressive until the ground shifts. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who was literally enslaved for a chunk of his life, so he earned every word he ever wrote, said that no man is free who is not master of himself, not master of his calendar, not master of his craft, master of himself. That's internal architecture. That's knowing why you do what you do, at the level beneath the story you tell yourself about why you do it. The wound doesn't care how many productivity apps you have. It will keep producing the same result until you look directly at it, not from shame, not from analysis paralysis, but with the cold, clear eyes of a Stoic examining what is actually, factually, in front of them. So ask yourself, what pattern keeps repeating in your life that you keep blaming on external circumstances? 3. The projection trap. Why you hate in others, what you hide in yourself. This one is uncomfortable. I want you to think about someone who genuinely irritates you. Not a war criminal, just a person in your daily life who gets under your skin in a way that feels almost personal. Got them? Now here's the part that's going to cost you something. There is an almost statistically reliable chance that what enrages you about them is a quality you have either suppressed in yourself or secretly fear you embody. Jung called this projection, casting the film of your own interior conflicts onto the screen of other people. The person who rages about dishonesty and is cheating on their taxes. The person who can't tolerate neediness and calls their mother 4 times a day. The person who despises arrogance and rehearses arguments in the shower. It's not a character flaw, it's a signal, a spotlight. The Stoics had a concept called fantasia, the impression that things make on the mind. They said the first practice of wisdom is interrogating your impressions before you react to them. When someone triggers you deeply, your first Stoic move isn't to respond, it's to turn the spotlight around. What if that person is showing you something you buried? What if your irritation is a compass pointing straight at the part of your shadow you haven't integrated yet? 4. The mask has a price tag, and you're paying it daily. Persona, Latin for mask. It's also where we get the word person. Think about that for a second. The concept of personhood is etymologically a mask. The Stoics knew this. They used the metaphor of theatre constantly. We all play roles: citizen, parent, professional, friend. The danger isn't playing the role. The danger is forgetting you're playing it. When your mask becomes your face, you start performing life instead of living it. You curate yourself for every room you enter. You shapeshift to belong, and the cost is enormous, not just in energy, though the performance fatigue is real, but in identity. You slowly lose the thread back to yourself, the authentic preferences, the genuine reactions, the unconditioned self that existed before the world told it who to be. And here's the kicker: the mask never actually protects you. People sense inauthenticity the way dogs sense fear. You're burning energy, projecting a version of yourself that other people half believe, while your actual self is locked in the back office, atrophying. Epictetus didn't wear a mask. He couldn't. When you've been enslaved, performing for your oppressors is what gets you beaten. He learned that the only freedom no one can take is the one between stimulus and response. The mask is the stimulating agent. The integrated self is the only one who can respond freely. 5. Rage, lust, fear. Your shadow speaks in extremes. The shadow communicates the way a toddler communicates, loudly, irrationally, and always at the worst possible time. But unlike a toddler, you can learn its language, and when you do, the extremes start to make sense. Sudden, disproportionate rage is almost always about a boundary being violated that you were never allowed to enforce. Irrational fear about success is almost always about a belief, installed early, that you don't deserve it, or that having it makes you dangerous. Uncontrollable craving, whether it's food, validation, substances, or screens, is almost always a hunger for something the shadow was denied so long it forgot what the real thing even tastes like. Marcus Aurelius didn't suppress his anger, he examined it. In the Meditations, which was his private journal, not a public performance, he catalogues his irritations, his frustrations, his ego's complaints. And then he asks, what is this actually about? That practice of interrogating the extreme emotion before acting on it is shadow work in Stoic form. It doesn't require a therapist's couch or a vision quest in the desert. It requires the willingness to sit with the uncomfortable feeling long enough to ask it one honest question: what are you protecting? The answer will surprise you, and what comes next will change you. 6. The iron rule of shadow work. You own what you don't claim. Here's a rule that has no exceptions. The parts of yourself you refuse to claim will claim you. Whatever you don't consciously own becomes unconscious behavior, compulsive, repetitive, invisible to you, but obvious to everyone who loves you. The person who insists they're not competitive gets destroyed when someone beats them to a promotion and can't understand why they're devastated for weeks. The person who claims they don't care about status buys a car they can't afford when a college friend goes viral. Disowned traits don't dissolve, they go underground and operate on autopilot. The Stoic concept of orkeiosis, roughly, the process of making something properly your own, applies here beyond just external things. To make yourself properly yours, you must claim all of you, not to act on every impulse, not to become every version of yourself that exists, but to know them, to say, I have this in me, I see it, I choose what I do with it. That is the difference between a man driven by forces he doesn't understand and a man who has studied his own interior, the way a general studies a map. One of them wins by luck, the other one wins by design. Claim the darkness, then decide where it goes. 7. Solitude is a scalpel. Use it or stay numb. The modern world has made discomfort with silence into an industry. Every pocket in your pants has a device specifically engineered to ensure you never have to sit alone with your own thoughts. That's not an accident. A person who can sit with themselves fully, quietly, without reaching for a screen, is a person who is dangerously self-aware, and self-aware people are harder to sell to, harder to manipulate, and considerably harder to keep distracted. The Stoics practiced melody, deliberate contemplation. Every morning Marcus Aurelius would sit with what the day might bring and rehearse his values before the world got its hands on him. Every evening, Seneca reviewed the day, not with judgment, but with clear-eyed assessment. Where did I fall short? Where did I act from fear? This isn't journaling as a self-care aesthetic. This is surgery. Solitude, used intentionally, is the scalpel that separates what you actually believe from what you've been conditioned to perform. Most people are terrified of this operation. They'll mistake the anesthesia for numbing and call it peace. It isn't. Real peace comes after the cut, when you finally see what was actually inside the wound, and you realize it was never as monstrous as you thought. Sit in silence for 10 minutes tomorrow morning. No phone, just you. See what comes up. That's your shadow, tapping on the glass. 8. Forgiveness is strategy, not sentiment. Let's kill a myth. Forgiving yourself for who you used to be is not weakness or excuse-making. It is the only logical move for a person who wants to change. You cannot renovate a building you haven't assessed. You cannot assess a building while you're standing outside it, throwing rocks at it. The shame that drives most people's self-criticism isn't making them better, it's keeping them locked in the identity of the person who made the mistake, which paradoxically makes them more likely to repeat it. The Stoics drew a hard line between what has happened, immovable, past, fixed, and what you do next. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and I'd add, we also suffer more in retrospective judgment than the original event ever warranted. Every bad decision you've made was made by a version of you with less information, less awareness, and a shadow they hadn't yet met. That version deserves your understanding, not your contempt, because contempt keeps you tied to them. Understanding lets you become someone else. Forgiving the past self isn't releasing them from accountability, it's releasing you from the prison of being them forever. This is the move that breaks the pattern. Everything changes after this. 9. Integration is not arrival. It's a practice you choose every day. Nobody completes shadow work. Let's bury that fantasy right here. Self-mastery is not a destination you reach and then coast from. It's a practice more like a martial art than a finish line. You don't earn a black belt and retire. You train, you slip, you train again. The shadow doesn't disappear when you integrate it. It evolves. As you grow, the unexamined edges shift. New provocations reveal new hiding spots. New success brings new fears you didn't know you had. What changes with practice is not the absence of the shadow, but your relationship to it. Instead of ambush, you get early warning. Instead of hijacking, you get signal. Instead of being dragged into old patterns by invisible hands, you notice the pull and you choose. That choice is what Epictetus meant by freedom. Not freedom from difficulty or darkness, but freedom from being controlled by it. A man who has sat with his shadow, wrestled with it, and made peace with it, is no longer startled by it. He sees the play before the curtain rises, and that 3-second gap between trigger and response, that's where the whole game lives. That's where your life actually happens or doesn't. Make peace with the process. It never ends. That's not bad news. That's the point. 10. The man who knows himself fears nothing. We end here not with a neat bow, but with a challenge. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. He said it in a court of law, defending himself against charges that would kill him, and he did not flinch. That's not bravado. That's what genuine self-knowledge produces, a bedrock certainty that external circumstances cannot shake, because your foundation isn't built on what the world thinks of you. It's built on what you know of yourself. The Stoics had a word for this, eudaimonia. It's often translated as happiness, but that's embarrassingly shallow. Eudaimonia is closer to flourishing, a deep, structural thriving that comes from living in alignment with your true nature. Not your performed nature, not your conditioned nature, your actual, integrated, shadow-included, fully claimed self. That man or woman is practically unbreakable, not because nothing hurts them, because they know what hurts them, why it hurts, and what it means. They don't run from themselves, they live there. You've been running long enough. Turn around. Look at what's been chasing you this whole time. You'll find it isn't a monster, it's just you, the parts you were told to hide, and they have been waiting patiently for you to come home. That's 10 truths about your shadow and what's waiting on the other side of facing it. If even one of these cracked something open for you, a question, a recognition, a quiet, yeah, that's me, then do one thing, write it down. The moment of recognition is the most valuable real estate in personal growth. Don't scroll past it. If this channel is where you come to think harder about who you actually are, subscribe, not for the algorithm, for yourself. Because the people who engage with ideas like this are building something different, and the comment section here tends to be one of the few places on the internet where that conversation actually goes somewhere. Drop one word in the comments that describes the part of yourself you've been ignoring the longest. You don't have to explain it, just name it. That's the first act of integration, and it counts,